We're also identifying shocking levels of incompetence and probable fraud in the Social Security program for our seniors and that our seniors and people that we love rely on.
5:42 a.m. Washington, D.C. The city was silent in a way only a crisis can create. No traffic, no voices, only the cold glow of street lights reflecting off empty government buildings. Inside the state capitol, one office had come to life, not because of paperwork, but because Washington was about to face the largest Social Security fraud scandal in United States history. No sirens, no press cameras, only the low, steady rumble of unmarked vehicles moving into position. Within minutes, 14 federal and state government vehicles had surrounded a heavily secured administrative complex belonging to the Social Security Administration, the very system that millions of retirees depend on every month. But at exactly 5:51 a.m., the operation began. A coordinated task force comprised of 21 investigators from state audit agencies, federal inspectors, and special agents moved in wearing jackets and body armor. They carried sealed search warrants, digital evidence kits, and black cases labeled OIG case files and fraud analysis unit. This was not a routine investigation. This was a systematic takedown. At the front entrance, the command was given calm, precise, and controlled. A steel battering. Ram struck once, then again the doors collapsed. Alarms blared. Security personnel rushed through the hallways as agents moved with precision, locking down offices, cutting off internal network access, and isolating payment databases. Inside multiple secured offices, investigators began collecting files labeled retirement benefits, disability claims, and survivor benefits. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Files neatly organized, applications approved, standard processing procedures. But behind those folders, the numbers told a story too massive to ignore. According to state estimates and audit reviews conducted in late 2025, Washington had lost more than $2.2 billion in Social Security funds, quietly siphoned overtime money that should never have left the hands of vulnerable American citizens. That amount alone could fully fund retirement benefits for more than 180,000 Americans for an entire year. Investigators now believe the network had been diverting between $18 million and $24 million every month silently, continuously, without triggering a single internal alert. What they found inside was far worse than expected. More than 1,000 Social Security files had been falsified, each showing identical inconsistencies, duplicate identification codes, unverified addresses, and most alarming of all, payments that continued even after records indicated the recipients were deceased. As investigators reviewed the files, one name began to surface repeatedly in summaries, memos, and internal alerts. Daniel Robert Whitman, an executive-level authority within the Social Security system, not as someone approving individual payments. No director signs off on claims at that level. Because when $2.2 billion can disappear through simple approved checkboxes and electronic signatures, this is no longer fraud. This is institutional betrayal at the highest level. If this level of corruption sends a chill down your spine, don't. Look away, subscribe now, because what investigators are about to uncover goes far beyond Washington. The Government Accountability Office, a federal government office, has estimated annual fraud of over $500 billion in our nation, and we are working very hard to stop it. We're going to. When the doors of the SSA office were sealed and the first pieces of evidence began to surface, a conclusion formed quickly. And it was not what most people expected. This disaster did not begin with criminals breaking in, because this network was never just about stealing money. It was about converting trust into profit on a scale that directly impacted the financial lifeline of millions of retired Americans. Internal data revealed that over the past 36 months, the number of approved beneficiaries had increased by 18% in certain regions without any corresponding population growth. In some counties, new benefit recipients surged by more than 9,000 cases in a single year. On paper, it looked like efficiency, but in reality, it was acceleration without verification. And behind that speed, everything was concealed. Investigators now estimate that at peak operation, this system generated between $680 million and $750 million annually from fraudulent payments over $2 million per day. No warnings, No internal flags, no intervention because the system had been programmed not to question speed, but to reward it. When forensic teams began analyzing internal system logs, the first red flags appeared almost immediately. A sample of 200 recent approvals was selected for audit. 61% had been processed in under 48 hours. These were not routine pension adjustments, not standard monthly benefits, but high V-value claims approved with minimal verification, routed through layers of automated authorization, and cleared without resistance. And that was when the investigation took a different turn because the money did not simply disappear. It moved through a network of structured accounts, fabricated identities, and multi-layered financial channels designed to avoid detection. What initially appeared to be Social Security fraud was now pointing to something far more complex. Financial analysis revealed that a portion of the embezzled funds was being funneled into external networks already under federal surveillance. Operations linked to interstate drug distribution and organized prostitution rings across Florida, Texas, Illinois, and California. This was no longer just benefit fraud. This was fuel. Fuel for systems that thrived on dependency, exploitation, and silence. Inside a secured room, agents discovered 7 high-security workstations connected to a centralized access system. Transaction logs showed over $215 million circulating continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every transfer was scheduled, time patterns, weekly cycles, monthly distributions, quarterly adjustments. This was not a database. This was a command system. By the end of the first hour, one conclusion became unavoidable. This facility was not being used to conceal illegal activity. It was being used to manage it, to scale it, to optimize it, and to keep it invisible. For millions of Americans, especially seniors who depend on these monthly payments, this was not just fraud. This was a silent disruption of a critical source of survival income. At exactly 6:02 a.m., Federal Command received the update. The scope of the investigation was officially expanded. What began as a targeted arrest had now evolved into a multi-agency case involving financial crime, interstate operations, and organized trafficking networks. And for the agents on the ground, one truth could no longer be ignored. The man they had just arrested was not acting alone, and the position they had just secured was only the beginning. If you believe the truth matters more than silence, stay with this story because what comes next will expose just how deep this system truly runs. By 6:46 a.m., the operation had crossed a line that no one within the federal task force had anticipated. The issue was no longer how the money had been taken. The more urgent question had become where it had gone. At first, the billions of dollars lost appeared as scattered transactions, numbers moving between accounts, deposits appearing and disappearing, digital records layered over routine approvals. But when forensic analysts from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Financial Crime Units began mapping the flow of funds, a pattern started to emerge. Within just hours of being issued, the money had been broken into smaller transfers, sometimes $2,000, $5,000, or $9,000, $800 at a time, just below the reporting thresholds that typically trigger alerts. In several transaction clusters, analysts tracked more than 2,400 individual transfers executed within 72 hours, all linked to fewer than 50 originating accounts. That level of activity was not random. It required planning, it required coordination, and it required individuals who understood exactly how the system worked. As the investigation expanded, agents identified an intermediary layer, 21 individuals, who were not responsible for creating fraudulent claims, but for moving the money. These coordinators operated as financial conductors directing transfers across multiple banks, prepaid cards, and digital payment platforms. Each individual on that list received between $1.5 million and $3 million per transaction cycle. Every transfer was fragmented, layered, laundered through shell companies, and then reintroduced into the system as consulting fees, logistics contracts, or equipment payments. And that was only the portion that could be traced because alongside the financial flow, a second channel began to emerge, a distribution network not visible in the original records, but connected through the same routing patterns. Federal investigators now believed that a portion of the embezzled funds was being funneled into interstate drug distribution networks, supporting the movement of hundreds of kilograms of illicit substances across state lines. Money from a federal benefit system now sustaining criminal infrastructure on a far larger scale, one system feeding another, one network reinforcing the next. According to federal analysts, the financial architecture behind this operation was not only complex, it was deliberately engineered. This was not spending, this was reinvestment. By 7:46 a.m., all remaining ambiguity had disappeared. This was not a criminal network that had infiltrated a government system. This was a network operating through it. Structures built to serve the public had been repurposed, used to shield, direct, and expand a nationwide criminal enterprise. And for the agents standing inside that facility, one truth could no longer be ignored. They were no longer investigating fraud. They were standing inside a system that had turned against itself. If you believe networks like this should be shut down permanently, comment "shut it down," because what happens next will determine whether this system can ever be trusted. Again, 7:58 a.m., Federal Command Authorization. The order was executed immediately without hesitation. What began as a targeted investigation within a single administrative complex in Washington had now escalated into a full-scale federal sweep. This was no longer about tracing stolen benefits. This was about dismantling a system that had been operating in plain sight across state lines for years. No sirens, no public warnings, just synchronized movement. Within minutes, federal task forces were deployed across 4 states: Florida, Texas, Illinois, and California. More than 480 agents from multi-agency units moved into position simultaneously. 32 search warrants were executed at once. Bank alerts were triggered instantly. More than 900 financial accounts were frozen in under 20 minutes. The flow of money, continuous for over 3 years, was interrupted. For the first time, the system hesitated. At key locations identified through forensic mapping, agents breached sites that had previously appeared legitimate: consulting firms, financial service offices, logistics contractors. But inside, the operational pattern was unmistakable: rows of encrypted workstations, dedicated servers running transaction routing software, live dashboards tracking the movement of money in real time. This was not support infrastructure, this was a command and control system. At one facility alone, investigators recovered 17 high-capacity servers storing layered transaction histories tied to more than 3,200 fabricated identities. Many of those identities had been reused across multiple states, circulating through benefit claims, financial transfers, and reinvestment channels. Nothing here was random. Everything had been engineered at scale. At 9:12 a.m., the first wave of arrests began. In the initial phase, 64 individuals were taken into custody. Not street-level operators, not low-level participants in fraud, but coordinators, facilitators, system managers. Among them were the 21 financial intermediaries previously identified. In transaction chains, individuals who had directly moved millions of dollars per cycle. Each operated under a legitimate front, registered businesses, licensed titles, verified credentials. But their true function was entirely different. They did not create the fraud. They sustained it. And then came the confirmation no one in the operation could ignore. Some of those arrested were not external actors. They were insiders, personnel with authorized access to internal systems. Individuals capable of approving, overriding, or accelerating payment processes without triggering review protocols. For years, they had not bypassed the system. They had become part of it. Asset seizure teams moved immediately. By late morning, federal authorities had seized more than $480 million in assets, including $72 million in cash, multiple forms of cryptocurrency, and controlling stakes in shell companies used to circulate funds. Accounts that once processed millions per week were now inactive. Routing chains collapsed. Transmission cycles failed. The infrastructure that had quietly moved money was now exposed to full view. But even as the system began to break apart, something else emerged. Inside one of the secured data clusters, investigators uncovered a secondary list. Not transaction records, not account holders, names, individuals not involved in executing the operation, but in protecting it. And at that moment, the reality shifted once again. This network did not just exist within the system, it had been shielded from above. The arrests were underway, but the structure behind it had not yet been fully revealed. 8:40 a.m., Washington, D.C. By mid-morning, the consequences could no longer be contained. Inside the Social Security system, partial shutdown protocols had been activated. Payment channels were temporarily halted. Verification reviews began across millions of records. What had once operated continuously was now under scrutiny. More than 2.66 million benefit files were flagged for immediate reevaluation. For thousands of Americans, especially retirees, the impact was instant. Payments delayed, accounts frozen, uncertainty replacing stability. By early afternoon, federal investigators confirmed what had only been estimated hours earlier. The confirmed financial loss had reached $2.22 billion, but internal projections suggested the true scale could exceed $3 billion once all fraudulent layers were uncovered. More than 180,000 individuals were believed to have been directly affected, not by accident, but by design. This was no longer a failure of oversight. It was a failure of structure. Because the deeper investigators went, the clearer the pattern became. Approvals had not been questioned. Speed had been rewarded. Automation had replaced verification. The system had not been broken. It had been allowed to operate this way. By the end of the day, 64 defendants faced formal federal charges with over 120 additional individuals under active investigation. Charges ranged from large-scale financial fraud to organized criminal conspiracy, each carrying the potential for decades in prison. But the legal process, no matter how extensive, could not immediately repair what had been lost. For millions of Americans, trust in a system designed to protect the vulnerable had been shaken. For those who depended on it most, the damage went beyond money. It reached into something deeper: security, certainty, belief. Because when a system built to support the people can be turned against them at this scale, the question is no longer how it happened. The question is, how many others are still operating undetected? If you believe systems like this must be exposed and shut down, comment "expose the system" because this story may only be the beginning.